And hello, thank you. Welcome. Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Journey, where we interview real entrepreneurs with real stories to learn more about what owning a business is really like. Today, we're going to be talking to Jerick Henley with ASHG to find out more about the winding road that has led him to where he is today. Jerick is a serial entrepreneur who has spent the better half of 3 decades building thriving organizations from the bottom up. His first company was a technology and systems integration company that became a true disruptor in the market by changing the service model of that industry. The conclusion of this effort was a successful sale to a venture capital firm that leveraged the success and culture of the company into a national presence. His current venture, AHSG, is one of the nation's largest fully diversified healthcare staffing organizations, built on the same principles that had proven successful in the technology service industry. ASHG has been named both the fastest growing staffing firm in the U.S. and one of the best staffing firms to work for in the industry. Congratulations, Jerick, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Sounds better when you read all that.
Yeah. I make you look good.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Okay, so tell us, I did my words. Now you tell us about you and your business.
Oh. When we start from the beginning, I can back up a little bit. I appreciate both of the short summaries of the two businesses that really have shaped my life over the last 3 decades, as you mentioned, which makes me old. But started my first one when I was right out of college. In fact, a week out of college, started that technology services business. And I think I've told you this story, but it was eye-opening, to say the least. I came out of college with a lot of energy and enthusiasm, probably overly confident and full of pride and ego, and started a business and went on a very first sales call. And about 2 weeks into that adventure, went on this particular sales call to a client who had asked me to bring a particular product over and show it to him. And again, leaned heavily on my just confidence at the time, grabbed this particular product that I knew nothing about and went to this client and tried to set the product up to display it and show it to him. He could clearly see that I didn't know what I was doing very well. Struggled through it to the point that the client actually left the room. And when he left the room, there was one of his assistants that was in there, and we struggled again for another 30 minutes. And at some point, I finally got the equipment working the way it was supposed to. And we sat there for about another 30 minutes waiting for the client to come back in, me and his assistant. And he never did. So I actually walked down the hallway and poked my head in his office. His name was Steve. And I said, "Steve, I think we've finally got it set up. I apologize for the delay. Do you want to come see it?" And he didn't even pick his head up from the table, just continued to write whatever he was doing at the time. And so I interrupted again and said, "Steve, I've got this finally set up. I think it works." And I'll never forget this. He stopped and looked up at me, took his pencil, smashed it on the desk, like literally broke it as he threw it so hard, and began to cuss me out. And when I say cuss me out, I'm not talking about that he just called me a few names. He put me on the cross. I think I used the term with you that I literally felt crucified. He put me on the cross and just let me have it. He not only called me every name in the book and told me that I didn't know what I was doing, I think he attacked my family. I mean, the guy just went ballistic on me. And I crawled out of that office and actually left the product in there, told his assistant they could look at it if they want to. And when I left that office, I got in my truck, and if I turned left, I would go back to my office. And if I turned right, I would go the opposite direction, like moving away from the problem. And I actually did turn right. And I thought to myself at that moment, like, this can't be what business is going to be like. Like, I've been on one sales call and I literally have been cussed out. And I turned right and drove for about 15 or 20 minutes, and something hit me that I wasn't going to let somebody talk to me like that, even though it was a self-inflicted wound. I turned the truck around, went back and went in there and apologized again, but literally forced him, if you will, to come back and look at the product. Having said all that, that's how I started my career. That was the very first sales call I went on. And there were a few things that happened that day that probably transformed the rest of my 30 years, which was a level of tenacity that I don't think I would have ever achieved if I had started smoothly, so to speak. I needed my pride and ego checked, and I was absolutely humiliated that day. And I learned that preparation, right, and purpose has value. And I never forgot that, ever. So I'm thankful for that day. And if I had to tell you, if you want to hear the rest of the career, that day was an epiphany for me. And it was, look, this isn't going to be easy. And you're not going to lean on your confidence that has gotten you through college or anything else. You're going to have to work hard at this. And the irony is he became one of my very best customers. And I've thanked him throughout the years for that moment. Because if he had treated me differently, I don't know that I would have learned the lesson so early. So that's how my career started. And it's gone from there.
So did you go back to him that day and resell?
Yeah, I went back within 30 minutes, went back in and
Wow.
kind of jumped on the sword. And he wasn't real receptive even that day. I mean, it took a while to rebuild that relationship and build confidence on his behalf and my my value. But I did go back in. I had to go back in. I had to go back in that moment, or I don't know that I would have walked in another door for the rest of my life, so to speak. I mean, it was that devastating. I'd never been spoken to or treated that way in my entire life. And it sounds ironic, but I can't tell you how thankful I am for that moment, because the rest of my career has been not dissimilar. You know what? This stuff is hard.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of effort. There's a lot of doors that get slammed in your face, and you got to be tenacious about it. And had I not experienced that early on, might have taken me a little bit longer to learn the lesson. So
that's great. And I think for so many people, they don't understand how hard being an entrepreneur really can be. I mean, you're coming at it from a sales perspective, but the notion is, oh, I'm going to start a business and we're going to live happily ever after, and it's just going to go smoothly the rest of the time. And that's just not the way it works.
No, it's been the greatest happiness I've had in my life at times, and it's been the most difficult, and sometimes in the same day. Right? I mean, it is difficult. It's definitely worth the effort. I wouldn't change my career path. I had a lot of good friends that went on a corporate career path early on out of college, and they've done very well for themselves. That's just not ingrained in me. People will tell you, although you mentioned the two businesses, we've actually started and done multiple things outside of the two major businesses that we've been blessed to transition into some VC or PE firm. But I enjoy getting rocks rolling. And much like a lot of entrepreneurs, my forte is not to keep them rolling. So my wife will tell you, I like to build gardens, but I don't like to garden very much. So if I don't know the appropriate time to take a well-built garden and hand it over to a meticulous gardener, then my ventures aren't very successful typically. So
that's good. That's really good advice. So I guess then you have your meticulous gardener.
I have a fantastic business partner today. We're the yin and the yang to each other, so to speak. He's very organized, very meticulous. I would be more of the culture guy, the forward facing. And it's a tremendous partnership. I've had many partners throughout my career. And I would tell you, Mark currently is a fantastic partner. That's a perfect match. So yes, somebody who's building, and he's a builder as well. I'm not diminishing his value, but we each have our strength and they play on each other. So yeah, absolutely.
So let's spend a little bit of time on the partnership, because as an entrepreneur, I've had some partnerships go south, and my husband, he's an attorney. He's seen some partnerships go really south. Yeah. So, partnering can be very scary, and done well and done right, obviously it's very successful and helpful. Talk to me a little bit about the success of your partnerships, the challenges you've had with your partnerships. I think let's explore the partnership aspect of your business for a little bit.
I get asked this a lot, and this is a bit off the cuff, but I do get asked this a lot. Like, how do you have the discernment to choose a good partner? And I think there's a particular aspect to that, but that's like asking, how do you choose a great spouse? And what we all think is we chose a great spouse, but what we really do is we invest in a great marriage. And so I think there's some discernment up front. Certainly you got to be equally yoked, right? So Mark and I, and he's by far the best partner really that I've had. I mean, I've had some great partners, but not at this involvement, right? Some of them have been investors and, kind of standoffish partners, or so Mark's fantastic. We've been together. This is our 13th year in business together. So I think there was some discernment to make sure we were equally yoked. That might be not just in our business philosophy, but even in our personal lives, our faith. I think there's value in that. The more that common ground we can find in those areas, we have something to build off of. And Mark and I worked at that, but we had known each other for a long time. So we had the blessing of both watching each other sell previous companies. So I knew Mark when he had a previous company. He knew me when I had my first company. And we got to watch that transaction take place for each other. So I saw him sell to a strategic investor and have a great career with them. He saw me sell to a financial investor, meaning a venture capitalist. And it was a much rougher go, so to speak. And so we got to compare notes to that transaction. That also created some bond for us. So again, I would say we had about 10 years of kind of exploring each other and again, making sure that we were equally yoked. But two things happened when we decided to do business together, no longer just be friends, but do business with one another. Is the first thing we did was not figure out what we would do when we succeeded, but define what it looked like when we had to unwind it, right? You wouldn't do this in your marriage necessarily, right? In other friendships, but in a business partnership, the success is going to take care of itself to some extent, right? Like if we're successful, those become a little bit easier decisions. But if we're not very successful, how do we unwind this? So how do we exit properly? And talking about that exit actually puts the conversation in a context of reality, right? Mm-hmm. And you begin getting very transparent with one another. And so I think Mark and I approached it. So we had a great business plan. But part of the business plan was very clearly, if this doesn't succeed, if it doesn't work, how do we unwind it and how do we leave and go back to the relationship we had in the beginning? And I think that's helped us tremendously. Now, the second part of that is, as I said, with a marriage, it's been work the whole way. I thought I knew him real well. And you know what? It's a great story. Please don't show him this podcast because he'll make fun of me if I say this, but I'd known him for 10 years and we're building a business plan together. The way we started this company is we made a small acquisition of a pharmacy staffing company out of Houston, Texas, relocated them to Edmond, Oklahoma. And that was the platform we built on. The rest was organic for another 3 or 4 years after that. But we did make an acquisition to begin with. And when we made that acquisition, moved everybody here. Mark quit the job that I mentioned he was involved with. I'd already left and departed. And so I'm fully engaged. And he comes finally and sits in the office and away we go. And we had our first vendor meeting. It was an insurance provider. I'll never forget this. And we're all sitting in the conference room and we're discussing the insurance. There's a lot of liability insurance, providing staffing, temporary staffing in the medical field. And we pretty much covered all the details, but there was a lot of pleasantries just going on. It's one of, biggest vendor by far. We don't have inventory or, products that we sell. So we're kind of concluding and Mark gets up and walks out. He kind of does an Irish exit, so to speak, I think is what they call it, right? He's gone because in his mind, the meeting's concluded and there's business to be done. And I'm the social guy. So I'm left in the room and they looked at me and said, is he mad? And I'm like, I don't think so. I think he's just done. Like it's time to move on to the next item. And I went to him afterwards and I'm like, I haven't seen that before. And he's like, what? And I was like, were you upset? And he's like, no, weren't we done? And in his mind, we were done, right? Business was concluded. There's no reason to do any pleasantries. And he left. Well, I have to tell you, I had never seen that before. So we have to go through the process of being like, well, I didn't know that about you. Okay, now I know. So, and it hasn't changed. We continue to work to this day on understanding one another and ultimately committing to a partnership that's beneficial, not only for the two of us, but equally important to our 400 employees.
Mm-hmm. So do you have any pearls of wisdom about navigating conflict and the different approaches that you guys have?
I think honesty and transparency are great. The number one character that I respect in people is humility. And if you can come to the table with some humility, I think that it gives me an opportunity to enter into a discussion, assuming best intentions, right? If I know you're a humble individual, then I can enter into a conversation. And if you know that I'm humble, we assume good intentions. And if we assume good intentions in those conversations, we have a tendency to work through things. And that's probably my pearl if I had one. Mark's really, really good about that. And we've never had an argument, but we've had some very heated discussions where he's opinionated about one side of the fence and I'm opinionated about the other. And we typically work through those without any problem. And I think, again, there's transparency and honesty, but it's followed up by humility.
That's really good. You talked about going in with the end in sight. You said you don't necessarily do that in a marriage. I think some people do. They call it a prenup, right?
Well, you're probably true. I didn't have enough to have a prenup before.
Me either. Okay, so tell us how you became an entrepreneur. What made you start this business, or how did you get? Take the leap.
I will tell you, it's a little bit hereditary, probably. So I have a tremendous entrepreneurial father who was in Vietnam, actually served in the Air Force during Vietnam, didn't serve in country, but was stationed in Germany. Had an electronics and communications background, came out of that conflict, moved back to the States, and started his own business at a young age. In fact, nobody on this podcast will probably remember, but even prior to DVDs and CDs and VHS tapes, there was a thing called a beta machine, which was the original way to record video. And he taught himself how to fix beta machines, and he was fixing those in a garage. That was his first business. And that transitioned, without telling you the whole history of my father, he basically was one of the innovators of the first orthoscopic surgery cameras. So the scopes that they put in your knee, when they're going to go scope your knee and see what's wrong with your meniscus or whatever, he was on the cutting edge of that. And right here in Oklahoma City, actually, him and his partner were on the cutting edge of developing that product. And so I get to watch him in his career. I saw the same tenacity, right, that I mentioned, the same intentionality. He was passionate about what he did. And most importantly, he was full of energy and enthusiasm about it. And he was relentless in the pursuit of that success. And he sold also to it wasn't to a PE firm, but to a strategic buyer at an early stage in the development of his first business, and went on to a very successful career in corporate America in that industry. So I'd have to tell you that bug was planted at a young age for me. And I always looked up to him. And it's probably what steered me first and foremost into an entrepreneurial aspect, is that I wanted to work for myself and I wanted to invest in myself. Didn't feel like I was the smartest guy in the world coming out of college. Still don't believe that today, but felt like I was full of a lot of energy and enthusiasm. And if I pointed that in the right direction and did it with the right character, that we could build some great businesses along the way. The Lord's blessed us.
Yeah, but being smart isn't necessarily the biggest determinant of success, right? Grit and hard work and knowing how to fail is going to get you a lot further than having book smarts.
I guess book smart people would say no, smarts are important. If you're not book smart, then maybe it's easy to agree with you. And for me, it never was. I mean, I entered into a business. Electronic security was never on my radar. I don't have a degree in electrical engineering or anything else. Nothing actually in the engineering field whatsoever. I had a business degree. And my first business was selling technology that I didn't even have a clue about. I had to be self-taught in the use of that technology and the value and the benefit of it. And that's part of the entrepreneurial path, right? We're all selling something. As entrepreneurs, we're truly always selling something, whether we're selling a product, a service, or a company, or whatever else. And so I had that gift, and I buckled down and taught myself enough about the technical aspect of the business that I could go and have a conversation. But it was around the three principles. Grit is certainly one of them for me. If you've ever read Angela Duckworth's book, Grit, it's a fantastic book. We actually teach on it here at our company on a regular basis. It's part of our culture. She proposes an equation in that book that is talent times effort equals skill, and skill times effort equals achievement. The thesis behind it is that effort counts twice. God gave us all some talent. We put some effort behind that talent. We turn it into a skill. That was me developing my understanding of sales or technology, right? I could be the world's greatest salesman and have the best understanding of technology, but unless I double down on the effort and take that skill and go out into the marketplace, right, and actually sell those products or services and develop a company, it's of no value. So the second effort, meaning take that skill and turn it into an achievement, is something I believe in. And I always tell everybody I wasn't the smartest, but I have a high motor. When I was 4 years old, my dad nicknamed me Hot Rod because I ran around a lot. And I make up for my lack of intelligence maybe with the extra effort, but that was number one. Effort counts twice. It's part of our culture around here. and I've believed it for 30 years. Number two is that I think the ability to simplify is extremely important as an entrepreneur. What we do can sometimes be convoluted, right? We're the mavens in this a lot of times, right? We're cutting edge, early adopters, and we're trying to cast vision around sometimes a very complicated strategy. And if we can simplify that for our teammates or maybe our clients who are making purchasing decisions, I think the ability to simplify is at the key of a great entrepreneur, because I got to take the big picture and I got to narrow it down to something that people can digest, right? And they can get behind. And the third one is actually the why. And that's what people get behind. People work for what's and hows, but they're committed to whys, right? We all know what we do or how we do it, but the why behind what we do, right? And for me, it was about supporting families and believing in individuals and creating opportunities for them from the get-go. We still believe all that around here today. And if they believe in the why, they get real sticky, right? Meaning they want to stay with you. They believe in you. They believe in your vision. And I had people that worked for me for 20 years in our first business. And in fact, some of them are still at the company that I sold today. So that kind of belief in the why is always weighs heavy on me. So those were the three things: effort counts twice, ability to simplify, and then cast the vision around the why.
That's really great. I was in a business group for a long time, and for a long time we talked about how do you develop a culture of grit? Can you teach grit to people? And some of that was born of people in the group who had frustrations with people on their team not demonstrating grit. You talked a little bit about effort counts twice and Angela Duckworth's book. We've read that book. But do you have any other insights into how to create a culture of grit, or how to teach grit?
It's a great question. We have a leadership training course here at our company. We actually follow a program through Giant. You may know Giant. They're a Jeremy Kubicek and his books, 100X Leader and so forth. And there's a lot of good ones out there, but we happen to follow a particular training program I lead. In fact, we lead 2 classes every other Thursday for a group of about 60 up and coming leaders within our company. And this is the number one question I get from them, because these are the individuals leading teams, right? And they're like, you wouldn't be in that position unless you had some grit. And so they're trying to figure out, how do I instill grit in my teammates and my teams? And I think there's a couple things. Number one, when we teach that class, I try to set expectations real early on. We have a new employee onboarding and orientation program called Immersion. I mentioned this to you before. It's kind of groundbreaking to some extent, but we take every new employee and we spend 4 days with them. Our entire executive team, they have lunch at my partner, the CEO's house. I cook for them one particular day. Our CFO takes them on a tour of Oklahoma City. I mean, there's a lot of personal touch during this 4 days. This is right when they start with us. It sounds like a little bit of overkill. You have to experience it to understand it. But one of the things I explain about that program is that somebody's asked me in the past, why is that so effective? And I said, well, first of all, it shows servant leadership, right? I'm going back to grit with this in a second, but they're like, okay, we get that, servant leadership. And I said, yes, but here's the difference. You can't explain servant leadership or show servant leadership by proxy. Now think about what that means is, like, if the CEO gets up and says, hey, we're all about servant leadership, and then leaves the room and asks his administrative assistant to take you to lunch, you're asking to show servant leadership by proxy. We try to eliminate that, right? I want people to see an example that they want to live up to. So same thing with grit. If we're displaying grit at the executive level, the leadership level, right, then they get to see it personified. And I think that's critically important. So if you can't do servant leadership by proxy, you probably can't display grit by proxy either. Right. So it has to be authentic. They have to sense it and they have to feel it. And I think there's a population that receives that. They're inspired by it. They see it within our company and they live up to that expectation, right? They see the value of it because they see opportunity that comes their way, the growth of the company. And so they can buy into that. And we point to it a lot. So that vocabulary is with us all the time. You hear the word grit around here a lot. I will tell you the second piece that I tell that group of leaders, and you know that I have a deep desire to be a farmer. You know, your husband knows this as well. I do tell them, though, the story about how I farm a field. And we have about a 20-acre field, and half of that field is really productive soil. And half of it is really not very good soil. And when I plant the same seeds with the same fertilizer, with the same amount of rain on those two different parts of the field, you know what happens? One of them grows real, real well. I get a bumper crop out of that very fertile soil. And the other part where I gave the exact same attention to, right? The same seed, the same fertilizer, had the same environmental conditions, meaning the same weather, the same rain. It doesn't produce the same level of crop. The fact of the matter is that we're going to invest in people along our path, and some of them are going to believe in your why and your what and your how, and they're going to embrace grit, and they're going to want to be a part of your organization. And sometimes that just doesn't happen. And I've had to learn over 30 years that not everybody is cut from the same cloth, so to speak. I have to have some discernment about that. Now, it is incumbent upon me to make the same investment in both types of soil, because I can't tell sometimes if somebody is fertile soil and they're going to believe in this and they're going to embrace grit, or are they not? So it's incumbent upon us to make the same level of investment in each individual, but they have a responsibility in it too. Do they want to step up and embrace that culture? We tell everybody that starts here from the get-go, this place may not be for you. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make us a bad person. At the end of the day, it's got to be a good match. And so I think you have to live it, but you also have to come to the realization that not everybody's going to buy into it every single time. So let's shake hands and move on, and we'll go find some fertile soil.
Yeah. Do you hire for grit? I mean, do you interview for that?
Yeah, we actually do interview it. And I'll tell you how embodied it is into our culture is 7 out of 12 new employees that go through that orientation program every single month, right? So we try to run 12 people through it every month. The program works better if it's a smaller size. So even if we have a larger new employee group, again, we try to limit it to 12. But 7 out of 12 of the individuals that go through that program every single month come from a referral from somebody that works for us currently.
Yeah.
You think about what that does to talent acquisition cost, drives them way down. And I always use that as a nice benefit. But the greatest benefit is if you advocate for a place that you work, meaning you love it, you know what you won't do is advocate to bring somebody in that's going to diminish the culture, right? Or destroy the very values and the things that you love about the place. Typically, we have a tendency to invite people to come be a part of things if we think they're accretive to what we enjoy already. So when you ask me if we interview for it, yeah, sure, we can interview. And there's certain questions I can ask, and we can ask their opinion of those things. But if you refer me to somebody, if you're an employee that's been here at this company and you enjoy working here and you refer somebody to us, you know what you did? You vetted them for me. Hmm. You're not going to invite somebody to destroy the very thing that you value.
That's really great. That's really interesting. So we've talked about your successful businesses and selling. Have you had some not so successful business ventures? Do you mind sharing about that?
Yes, I've had plenty of those as well. And it typically is when I get out of my wheelhouse, so to speak. Like I've been in the restaurant business. That was a debacle at one point. My dad was in the restaurant business, and that was a debacle for him. You think I would have learned that lesson, but I didn't. Our two failures were a little bit unlike each other. For me personally, the great lesson that came out of that is I was a distant investor and in the restaurant. So I did not have day-to-day involvement in it. Although I wasn't truly an investor, there was 4 of us that were partners in it. None of us could spend the full amount of time we needed in the business. So we were relying upon somebody else to manage the business with the same vested interest that we had. And that just is never going to happen. As an entrepreneur, an investor, I mean, I'm going to be the one that steps in and I've got the vision. I have all of the investment, and I'm going to receive the vast majority of the benefit. And I'm asking somebody else to manage that business. And we had a manager that was managing that restaurant, and they weren't either incentivized or they hadn't bought into the why, and it was a failure. And at that point, it was, look, I don't mind being an investor in other people's businesses. I've done that in the past, continue to do that. But at that level where I'm truly involved as a partner in the business, and we're going to ask somebody else to, from the get-go, the start, not under some level of tutor, or teaching, managing them. We asked somebody else to run the business, and it just didn't work for us. And it was quite the failure. Plus, I'd never been in the restaurant business, so I need to stay in my wheelhouse. Now, you might ask me, I'm rambling a little bit, but I moved from technology to staffing. When I got in the staffing business, I couldn't spell staffing. But what I'd been doing for 15 years prior to that was managing teams. And the vast majority of what we do here is managing internal teams that then manage external teams. And so, although a little bit of a different product and service, I was able to leverage that first 15, 17 years worth of experience and leverage it into this particular business, which again is a people business. So,
well, and I was going to ask that. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur and you can learn on the fly a business you didn't even know anything about, then why does one work and the other does not?
Yeah, it's a great question. I had some anxiety about coming into the staffing space. One, because Mark's been in it before, and he's very seasoned veteran in the healthcare staffing space, and I didn't know much about it. But over 6 months of developing a business plan, both to make an acquisition and then to grow organically, it was pretty evident that this was a people business. And my greatest asset has been dealing with people, right? Building a culture around what I would call servant leadership. In fact, our business motto around here is make a difference daily in the lives of those we serve. You can break that whole thing down, but make a difference daily. So one, we want to make a difference, like be impactful. Like how are we so intentional and purposeful that we're impactful in the people that we serve? And the people we serve are our clients, obviously, our travelers. So these are the clinicians, the nurses that work for us. And then we serve each other, right? So we want to make a difference daily. So not only do we want to be impactful, but we want to be mindful that we need to do it all the time, right? Making a difference in somebody's life one time. Okay, maybe they remember that, but how do I serve daily, right? So make a difference daily in the lives of the people we serve, which I just mentioned, that population, right? And that's our motto around here. Well, that's not much different than I was doing in the technology space. I was just delivering a different product than I'm delivering today. So,
and the restaurant business is different because, I mean,
I don't know that it's different because of the service, right? It was different because I wasn't involved on a daily basis. I was at arm's length, asking somebody else to believe in my mission from a distance, and so we couldn't cast that vision. We couldn't make them believe in the why, right? Because we were doing it by proxy to some degree.
Yeah, that's good. You know, we might take a second. I'm not sure we've described or explained what your current business is. So when you're talking about making a difference, let's take a minute to talk about what
AHSG
does.
A lot of acronyms in the businesses we own here. They all start with an A, so you can't get that wrong if you start it with an A. But AHSG is the corporate holding company. We have 4 distinct divisions underneath that. So we would call ourselves a diversified healthcare staffing company at the highest level. And the 4 divisions are 2 of which are typical staffing agencies that you would normally understand. We do contingent labor for healthcare systems, the vast majority of which is called travel nursing. So it's been a hot topic over the last 3 years because of COVID. People understanding that we had a nursing shortage, and then also because of the rates that were being charged during that time because the demand was so high. But we basically take a clinician, let's call it a nurse. We do some allied professionals as well. Allied involves like OT, PT, SLP, things like that. But mostly what we do is on the travel nurse side. We take a nurse that wants a job opportunity. We match them with a healthcare system, mostly acute care hospitals across the United States that have a nurse need. Many years ago, back in the 80s, for some particular reason, this model was created where nurses would go work for 13-week assignments at hospitals and other locations where they didn't domicile. So If you lived in Oklahoma City, you would see an opportunity that would come up in Tampa Bay. You would go to that hospital and you would do a 13-week assignment to fill in for their contingent labor needs. Maybe they had somebody out on labor or, a pregnancy, maybe sick leave. It could be a variety of things, but they had a need. And so that model was created. That's what we do. We send nurses to acute care hospitals to fill those 13-week assignments, again, all across the United States. We have about 1,200 nurses on any given day that are working in acute care hospitals somewhere in 50 states. That's the largest part of our business. There is a component in between healthcare systems and staffing agencies called a managed service provider, an MSP. So this is where a hospital has so many contingent labor needs, so many staffing needs, that they can't manage them very well because they're having to send those out to 100 different agencies, right? That's cumbersome. So an MSP steps in the gap between a healthcare system and all these agencies, and they aggregate the orders for the healthcare system, and then they disseminate those orders out to the agencies, and they facilitate the transaction of reviewing the submitted candidates for all those positions, and then facilitating the contracting for those travel assignments. So it can be more complicated than that, but we actually have an MSP. So we work with healthcare systems, like here in Oklahoma City, Norman Regional would be one of them, where we go in and we aggregate all of their staffing needs. Could be clinical, could be non-clinical even. And then we disseminate those out to a variety of like 100 staffing agencies, or in their case, it's about 250 staffing agencies all across the United States that see all of their needs and then try to fill those needs for them. And we facilitate that transaction. The fourth piece that we have is a technology piece. And this kind of leans back on some of my background, where we actually develop software that facilitates that transaction. So an MSP is the people aspect of it. This is people serving people, but they use a tool called a VMS, or a vendor management system, that allows them to facilitate that transaction. We actually have developed a cutting edge VMS that helps MSPs facilitate those transactions. And we not only use it for our own benefit, but we have commercialized it, monetized it, if you will. And many of our competitors in the staffing space use it to facilitate MSP transactions with other acute care hospitals. So,
wow.
Yeah,
that's a lot. I was taking notes.
Yeah, sounds complicated, but at the end of the day, what we do is we pair somebody, a clinician that needs a job, with a healthcare system or a hospital that needs an employee. And you know what? It's a beautiful transaction, because at the end of the day, that person needs a job. This person needs a clinician to give patient care. They are governed by certain laws that require them to have a certain level of patient care based on their census. So if you have a hospital that has 100 beds, they have a particular number of nurses that must be present for every one of those beds that's full. So they're mandated by that. Well, I get great joy out of making sure that we make that match, so to speak. I use the analogy that we don't sell pots and pans around here. What we do matters, right? And I told you that the why is important. Every day, our 400 employees get to go home at the end of the day knowing that they found somebody that needed a job and matched them with somebody that needed an employee. And at the end of the day, patient outcomes are affected by that. So we've got a real heavy why.
Yeah, no, that's great. So 400 employees, you keep saying. How do you, and you said it sounds complicated. It does sound complicated. How have you successfully scaled? Because I suspect you've had some rapid growth. Yeah. And rapid growth and scaling and maintaining the quality workforce. I mean, all of that is not always easy. So do you have any pearls of wisdom on that?
Yeah, I don't know that we've done it perfectly. I will tell you, COVID launched us into a new era of managing our business. Now we grew organically, and then we did 5 acquisitions in 2017. So we not only grew organically for the first 4 years of our existence, but then we did 5 acquisitions. We had to integrate those acquisitions. I mean, from January of 2017 to about the end of 2019, right prior to COVID, it was just tiger by the tail, right? We grew so rapidly, and those acquisitions were difficult. Now we're trying to not only bring products and services into the mix, but we're bringing people into the mix, and we're trying to merge cultures, create a culture. Because if you're not purposeful and intentional in creating a culture, everybody has a culture. Cultures
Right.
will develop on their own. So you either are intentional about it, or you acquiesce to the fact that you'll have one and you'll have no control over it. So the good news was we did a good job prior to COVID, and then COVID hit and everybody went home. Another blessing is we had technology in place where we could actually function remotely. Mark and I are not fans of remote workforce. In fact, 97% of our workforce prior to COVID were all in offices.
Oh.
Today, 55% of our workforce nationwide, of the 400, work remotely from their office or their home or wherever. And how do we manage that, right? How do we continue to have an intimate relationship, right, with all 400 people so that we have some accountability to one another? Because I'm a big believer that if we break bread and build relationships, we not only communicate, but we collaborate. And all companies talk about good communication, but at the basis of that, all I'm trying to do is establish good enough communication that we can truly collaborate, right? That's where that your value and your value and your value come together and accretively make us better. And we talk a lot about that. So we try to, even with a remote workforce, keep people engaged. In fact, this morning at 10 a.m., every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., I produce a live broadcast to all 400 of our employees. We do it from right here in Edmond. We do it via Teams channel, and everybody can log in. And we do a variety of things. We talk about just people's lives. This morning, I got to promote that one of our recruiters had a baby last week, right? Another one got married, and we share shout outs. So everybody in this company has an opportunity to send me a shout out every week that I will read for them, telling somebody thank you for how they served them. It could be from a business perspective. It could also be from a personal perspective. The individual that had a baby actually sent in a shout out, and she wanted to say thanks because that particular group of individuals got together. She works remote, and they signed up DoorDash for her for 5 days in a row, and a meal was delivered to her house every single day, even though she works as far from an office as you can get.
So, I love that.
But only 6 people knew that in the company. Today, all 400 know that, right? And it sets an example. So when you ask me, how do you install grid, or how do you do those things? How do you show servant leadership? Now I'm giving examples, right, within our own company. And we spend a tremendous amount of time. The show takes about 30 to 40 minutes every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. I read the shout outs, and then those are internal. Then we read testimonies off of our Google reviews and our social media pages, where our clients or our travelers have taken the time to go online, right, in a very public fashion and say something nice about either us as a company or the individual that served them well. And we highlight that every Wednesday morning because that reinforces the behavior, right? I want them to understand how impactful it is. And we see some consistency in that. We're in a business that's supported by high technology. AI, chatbots, a lot of interaction with automation for our travelers, where you could circumvent the discussion with a recruiter. The number one thing I hear in our testimonials, though, is that I like talking to my recruiter because they're available, right? And they're responsive, and they advocate for me. I always laugh about it. You can't have beer with your chatbot, right? Like nurses want to go work, and when they come home from a 12-hour shift, I have a nurse for a daughter. She may want to talk about the next shift, but you know what she wants to talk about first? How she got spit on today by one of her patients, or she got bit, or there was a slip and fall, or whatever. And, she likes to have an ear to be able to share that story with. And recruiters serve that function, and we hear it all the time. So we share stories like that, and that creates a personal relationship amongst 400 very disconnected individuals across the United States, where we can not only have some sympathy, but we can have some empathy. Because as soon as I hear that you have a struggle, right, and I read it on the morning show and somebody stepped in to serve you well, they're like, oh, they did that for me too. And it creates a lot of stickiness is the word I use. Like, people enjoy working here. We were just awarded, as you mentioned, one of the modern healthcare best places to work in America. And I think that's because, we serve well, not just to our clients and our candidates, but to each other. So
that's awesome. That's really great. You had referenced earlier back to stickiness and people staying with you. You sold the previous business, and some of the people you recruited there are still there.
yeah.
Selling a business doesn't always go well. You don't always sell to somebody that shares your why or shares your vision. And a lot of times people don't stay because they're not happy with the new ownership. And there's a lot of, I think, anxiety for employees when a business sells. So can you talk to that? Did you interview when you were looking to sell? Was that an aspect of the purchase, I guess?
Yeah. I think there's two components. So basically first asking, how did I analyze the transaction to basically use some discernment to judge the buying entity to see if we had alignment culturally. I will tell you, in my first transaction, when I sold to a VC firm, no, I did not spend enough time doing that. It was a financial transaction. I had a couple partners that wanted to see that come to fruition, right? It was going to be a successful exit for them. And the major focus of that transaction was financial. I don't like admitting that today because I think there were some casualties, but there probably would have been greater casualties had I not eliminated those partners through that transaction. So most of my close employees wouldn't know some of those details at the time. They do now. We've been transparent with one another, but it was kind of choosing A or B, and either one of them are going to have some casualty related to them. So, but I can be honest with you and tell you that culture was less of a focus on that first transaction. And ironically, I got just what I thought I might get. That VC firm was not focused on building us and our business from a cultural standpoint. There wasn't trust and transparency. Within 8 months, the CEO of that company had been fired. I actually took over as the CEO of the entity that bought me and stayed there another 16 months trying to correct the ship, right the ship, so to speak. But I got probably what I deserved out of that to some extent. I did not spend enough time looking at the culture and the long-term effects of that. When Mark and I partnered in this business, I made a absolute mandate that we would look at that we'd look at it when we began. So the acquisitions we were making, are they a cultural fit? And we would look at it at every transaction. We actually sold to a PE firm after about 5.5 years, and we've transitioned into our second PE firm just in the last 24 months here. So, and each time there has been an analysis of the cultural fit. Mostly because Mark and I have an anticipation that we wanted to stay and continue to build the business. And the people believed in our why. And if the why of the PE firm doesn't match, it's not authentic. I can't hide it. And so luckily, we've been fairly equally yoked with both PE firms, and it's worked out well. Now, from an acquisition standpoint, we're continuing to do acquisitions today. And part of our process is to go in and analyze the culture. Like, is this going to be a fit? And that's difficult because it can still be a good acquisition, right? You may be buying a book of business, you may be buying a product or service line, right? And so you want to take advantage of that. But at the time, the culture doesn't seem a fit. So how do we manage through that? And we're acutely aware of the anxiety that comes from an acquisition because Mark and I have both sold multiple times. We know what that feels like. We've also been on the purchasing side. So I'm acutely aware of the anxiety that comes with an acquisition. Partly what we try to do is, again, I believe in presence and proximity, is that when we go through this process with a company we're trying to acquire, that we put ourselves in close proximity to them. So I'm spending a lot of time in that office. I give a full day of Q&A to their entire employee panel. We typically buy smaller companies. So, maybe they have 50 or less employees. So I can go and I can spend the day and literally put myself on a pedestal and allow every one of those employees to ask me a very pertinent or direct question and give them the best answer that I can give. I want to instantly develop some rapport and some trust, because we're never going to have a real relationship if we don't develop some rapport and some trust. Now, I will fall back on my fertile soil. I've been doing this process exactly the same for the last 13 years, and we're always going to have some casualties. There will be people that will not extend trust, grace, respect, right? Even though I extend it. and there will be some casualties along the way. We actually look for those red flags early to try to end that relationship as quickly as possible, because if we don't, they can be detrimental to the people that are willing and eager actually to join a new organization where there's greater opportunity for them. We're buying founder-based businesses, and you know what? By definition, they have glass ceilings. If you have a small entrepreneurial company that was founded, but let's say a husband and wife, well, that's a very strict glass ceiling for the most part. We can come in, invest in that business, and a lot of times give those lower level employees opportunities to continue to grow that they may not have had with that small founder-led business. So, and we leverage that.
Do what?
We leverage that,
Yeah.
that concept, right? But even that doesn't work unless we build some trust and rapport up front. So.
Yeah, it was not Stephen Covey, but I think maybe it was his son or something wrote a book called The Speed of Trust, and it really addresses that issue and building trust in, in an organization in general, but it really specifically addresses that issue. So,
yeah.
So, what role has coaching or peer groups played in your career?
Oh, that's a great question. It's been vital. I would have to tell you, it should have been more vital. In fact, I've had the opportunity to coach a bunch of young men, mostly in regards to their beginning their careers. And the number one thing I tell them is seek wise counsel, more so than what I did. I already admitted I was full of a lot of pride and ego. So I ran hard and I just ran fast and bumped into a lot of walls and made a lot of mistakes. Unlike my partner, Mark is fantastic about seeking wise counsel, and he does it all the time. I did not do that as well as I should have. I've had some great mentors and some great coaches, and I'm thankful for all of them. And I've been part of some great organizations. YPO was one of them. That small group that I had at YPO was instrumental in helping me both exit my first business and helping me transition into this business. That advisory council that I was a part of was fantastic, and I'm thankful for it. But if I look back, I didn't do it as well as I should have. I should have spent a little bit more time seeking wise counsel. I did tell you the story, I think, probably one of the best things that my dad ever did for me. And although I looked up to him greatly and still do this day, he was not overly overt in giving me advice all the time. If I asked for it, again, if I sought counsel, he would. But one thing that he did tell me to do when I was just graduating college, as I was beginning to start my own business, he said, you should go find 10 guys that have been very successful that you can look up to, right? That's clearly evident that you respect them for either the careers, the families, whatever success they've had. And go ask them a simple question. What would you do if you were my age? Because what I know is that the older we get and the more successful we get, really the culmination of our career is somebody willing to ask us to be on a podcast so I could share you a couple stories. Like all of a sudden we feel valued a little bit. And when a young man comes to me and says, hey, would you mind sharing some stories with me or telling me what you think the pitfalls were? What would you do differently? I mean, there's pride and ego involved, but we see that there's value in the career that we've built. And my dad recognized that, and he gave me the list of 4 or 5 that he would recommend, and I sought out 4 or 5 others, and I actually did just what he said. I went and bought those guys a cup of coffee or a lunch. Nobody said no. I was 22 years old and full of energy and excitement, and when I told them what I was looking for, they all gave me an hour, and they all gave me some great advice, some of which I can still remember today. But I'm truly thankful that I was pushed to do that, because it did set a tone of seeking wise counsel. Even though I admitted that I didn't do it as well as I should have, man, there's great value in that. Because you know what? Somebody's done all of this. Maybe a little bit of a different product or service, but at the end of the day, somebody's done most of this. And if I can learn from their mistakes, maybe I can shorten the curve a little bit.
Wise counsel can be hard to find sometimes. Do you find, or did you have good luck with that?
No, I think you're right. I think you have to have some discernment about where the wise counsel is coming from, right? I mean, that the wisest counsel might be somebody that tells you where to go seek wise counsel, so that you don't run down a rabbit hole to some extent. I think it takes some discernment. And remember, I believe this. I mean, it may have been wise for that individual at that time. I tell my kids this, that's what worked for me, right? You're only taking my advice based on my experience, right? This is anecdotal. It doesn't mean it will work for you. It could be a personality difference, could be an effort difference, could be a timing issue. I mean, one of the greatest aspects of entrepreneurship is timing, right? Right place, right time.
Right.
So I think you have to seek a lot of wise counsel, and then you have to be smart enough to discern which one of those are more applicable to you at the moment. So yeah, that can be difficult.
All right, this has been great. So one final question. If you could give advice to entrepreneurs or people thinking of taking the leap of faith, what would you tell them?
Well, I've already told you kind of my 3 keys, which was, ability to simplify, explain the why, and effort counts twice. And I have to tell you, because this is truly anecdotal, effort matters. I mean, I've run into a lot of obstacles in my life, but the higher my motor ran, I just had a sense of bouncing off of them and going around. I think it's just hard work. I love work-life balance. We hear about it all the time. I've got 4 daughters, a beautiful wife. I have a lot of hobbies. I mean, I want work-life balance, but the work-life balance that I have today is mostly because it was out of balance for a little while in the beginning.
Yeah.
I had to put a lot of effort into getting this rock to roll. And now, thankfully, I'm blessed and I get a lot of the value back out of that. But I cannot diminish the amount of effort that it took up front to get the rock rolling. And that's my encouragement. I mean, if you're not the smartest, you don't have the best business plan, you don't have the best product or service, and there's always a time to pivot, right? We have to be smart enough to know. I mean, we've all shut down businesses. I told you my own failures. So I'm not saying that you just run into a pit, but at the end of the day, effort matters. And this stuff's not easy. And the more effort you put into it, ironically, the more stuff you get out. Out of the 10 individuals, and I could leave you with this, out of the 10 individuals that I interviewed, right, when I was 22 years old, and I'm looking at the character or the traits of each one of them, why they're successful, there was one common theme amongst all 10. They might have had some additional overlap, but there was a strong common theme amongst all 10 of them. And that common theme was they worked their tails off. Some were smart, some were good looking, someone started with, a higher level of privilege, if you want to say that, right? A better education. Maybe they had family money. I mean, I could go down the realm of where everybody started, but at the end of the day, those 10 individuals had one single thing in common, and they were willing to put a lot of effort behind their intentions, their plans. So,
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's really great. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely.
If you're interested in learning more about Jerick and his business, you can visit his website at www.theahsg.com.
There you go.
If you're interested in learning more about Optimize and how we help business owners succeed, you can visit my website at optimize.marketing. Thank you again. Thank you so much, Jerick. This has been fantastic. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tracy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Take care.